So everybody's sneaking out because data security and governance are the most boring topics on the planet, right? But they're also the ones that's going to get your company sued if you don't do the right things. You're going to find yourself with fines. And you're actually going to find yourself going through a lot of heroics that if you'd done a little bit of pre-planning, you wouldn't have found yourself in. So let's talk about what that means. Most of our CISOs in the audience? Do we have any CISOs in the audience? Okay. Guess this thing is a ditch. Any CISOs in the audience? Sounds like no. So let's get started. So what is governance? It's really understanding what information you have so you can basically track it and identify risk and figure out how you're actually going to be in compliance with that data. So it's very simple. You're going to see pages and pages, books and books, government legislation, but it's really about understanding what you have, coming up with principles about how you're going to use it, and then figuring out how you're going to manage that risk for that data. So today, we expect these guys to be separate from the normal IT organization. There's usually somebody whose job it is to do governance and compliance. In the smaller companies, it might be in IT, but likely it's somebody in some back office in the finance organization or somebody in legal. And what we're asking them to do is to come up with a set of policies that are pretty specific about stuff they don't know, right? So it's basically asking them to go ahead and make these rules about your data, and they have no idea what's in the data. So we're really asking them to protect and save something or keep something secure that they are basically guessing about. And at the same time, they need to keep your business running. So most of you have seen a lot of the high-profile break-ins. You had Sony, you've had Anthem, right? And the one thing you know is you can't stop people from using information. Sony tried to come off the net. That didn't last very long. So you've got to figure out how to put in data management and data governance in a way that allows you to continue to use your data at the same time that you're protecting, which is difficult. So what skills do you need to be able to do this? Well, if you had X-ray vision, you could look into the cloud and you could look into your storage array and you could say, here's what all my data looks like, here's what I'm doing. If you had psychic abilities, you could guess where all that data is hiding and going as it comes in and out of the organization, and you could guess what everybody was planning to do. All you just need is a crystal ball or a Ouija board. And if you could have a force field, which used to be what we call the perimeter, which doesn't exist anymore, you could build this wall and protect things. Well, I haven't met anybody with X-ray vision, although the Avenger movie's out there, one of those guys might have it. I haven't met anybody with real psychic abilities, and that force field thing not working for most folks, so we're going to have to come up with something new. So let's talk about X-ray vision. So people talk about protecting their data, but they don't know what the data demographics are. They don't know, do I have a lot of video? Do I have a lot of, Excel files? Do I have a lot of IP? People have had their source code stolen. They don't even know where it is. Am I meeting the NDAs? Am I meeting the contracts I've signed about source code and IP protection? Am I protecting clear case credit cards and things like that? So you can't visualize your data. You don't know what's in it. So to create a plan to manage it and to govern it without knowing what it is, really very, very difficult and probably not very practical. So the next thing you need to do is, so who's on your side? So this is a game of sides. It used to be in the data security space, you protected the perimeter, and you said anybody who had access to the actual physical equipment were the good guys. Well, if you look, you'll see that many of the breaches started with somebody on the inside. The classic one is Snowden, but there's a lot of others. If you actually go and look at the identity theft site, you will see that companies as small as doctors' offices and as big as Fortune 5,000, 500 companies have had data stolen. You'll also see that a lot of the breaches are caused because somebody on the inside did something stupid. So what do I mean by something stupid? You sent a PowerPoint around inside. It had a link to an Excel file. You weren't showing the confidential information in the Excel file, in the PowerPoint, but it was linked in the Excel file, and that data just got leaked because they just found that file and they could access all that content. You were in an ERP system and you cut and pasted some customer information, to a public share. All of a sudden, you've exposed things. So a lot of the data breaches are started by an act that was innocent that turned out to be kind of like leaving money on the counter in a bank. You just don't do that. So, how do you keep your data safe? First of all, I hate the word breach. Breach sounds like sort of passive. Somebody went through the moat, nothing bad happened. Data theft is not a victimless crime. In fact, you could consider it, it should be, it's not a petty crime either, because you're talking about millions of dollars in company reputations and fines. You're talking about huge issues around reputation. You're also talking about most companies have been breached. What they don't know is what has been stolen. And they don't know what was stolen, what was done with it. And to tell you the truth, it's pretty cheap to buy a credit card these days. You can probably go on a site within, probably 10 or 15 minutes, find someplace to buy one. And you can start, identity theft is incredibly simple these days. So people need to start to protect their data and to keep their data safe. And that goes back to what their governance policies are, how they're going to manage their data, and it also goes back to what risks they're willing to take with their data. So the other thing you need to be careful about is depending on what industry you're in, there's an alphabet soup of compliance. With HIPAA, you can't have any patient information, diagnosis codes, or really any personal information for healthcare. And you're responsible even if you're a subcontractor of a healthcare company. For simple PCI, you can't have any clear case credit cards. You can't have any personal identification information. Well, how do you know if that's in your data? I did a scan of my own data, and what did I find? I found the health records of my son when he was 2. He's 26 now. But in there, it had his social security number, and that was in my data. And I actually know better. So there's a bunch of stuff that's lurking out there, and compliance is trying to help you, but it's also, ignorance of compliance could be a huge fine. So you just want to be careful as you start to think about the data. So the themes here really are, you need to know what you have, you need to be very careful about how you want to protect it, and you need to have procedures so that you can watch what's going on. So what can you do? Well, the first activity is you need to assess your risk, right? And every company has risk. From the dentist office who got hacked, who lost his patient's information and actually ended up with some HIPAA issues, to the Fortune 100 or Fortune 1 companies who've had to go ahead and spend millions of dollars to give you insurance for your identity because they lost some of your personal information. You need to be monitoring. You need to understand as your data flows in your system what's going on, who's accessing, are they supposed to be accessing it? You need to be developing strategies to say, if we have a breach, what are we going to do? And as part of your good governance process, you're talking about what is the data, what are our data rules, how are we going to limit access, and what are we going to limit access to? And then if we have a breach, what are we going to do about it? Because the time at which you report is also very important. And if you have to report, some you have to report, some you don't. It'll depend somewhat on state. Each state has its own privacy rules. I believe 34 different states have 34 different laws around how to protect data. In Florida, I think it could go up to $500,000 depending on, what violations you hit. More expensive in California, Massachusetts. So you really do want to watch these things. And then you just have to have a reporting sequence. Because the last thing the IT guy wants to go and say, I didn't physically lose your data, but somebody hacked us and all the source code for VMware or all the source code for Microsoft is gone. In VMware, they actually did have someone steal source code once, right? Most companies don't even know it. They also don't know when somebody's leaving, are they data dumping? So data dumping is people naively believe they own the information that their company has. So if you're a sales executive, you naively believe you own that customer list. So when you leave, you take that with you. That's actually illegal. It's probably against your employment agreement. You don't really own that data. And that's one of the ways data escapes. You see the same thing with developers. They take source code with them and they use it again. That's bad for the company they left. It's worse for the company they went to. So you really do have to watch the life cycle of data and where it goes. And then you just have to create policies. So I hate process. I despise writing things down, and I hate tracking things. But data has become a huge asset and a huge risk. So you need to start to get it in control. Otherwise, your company is exposed. And part of that is to come up with a data governance that your company can live with, but also to come up with one where you're not sitting there with focus groups and panels and teams and committees and task forces. That's not going to work, right? It has to be something that's part of the workflow, and it has to be something that happens automatically and doesn't slow your business down. Otherwise, larger companies, mid-sized companies will be running at snail paces. So, do you think your IT guy is an IT superhero or a data security superhero? You ask these guys, they'll tell you they don't have X-ray vision. So they need their infrastructure to tell them what's in the data. They can't see it themselves. Psychic ability, they can't guess what's going to happen, but they can start to watch patterns and predict. So you can have predictive analytics. You can see that in the network. You can see that in your storage. Your storage should really be helping you protect what's in the data. The ability to put up a force field, not really, but modern firewalls and modern storage arrays can actually stop you from getting data outside where you don't want it to go. So you'll see a firewall stop you from getting your data out to Dropbox. You can see a storage array like the data gravity array my company provides tell you when someone's moving data out of the organization. You can see if someone's reading clear case credit cards. You can see also who wrote it. You can see as data flows through the system. These are all things that are proactive and are done within the infrastructure. So your governance should really be part of your IT infrastructure, and it really should be documenting itself, and it should be showing the flow itself. Now, I did a little bit of a joke, right? So any IT superhero has to look good in tights. We'll see what the new Batman looks like when he comes out. But your IT guy or gal doesn't have a shot at enforcing whatever the data governance are unless you give them the tools to do that. And those tools require that they understand the data. Those tools require that they get an MRI of what the environment is. Those tools will require some inconvenience, right? You'll start to turn things off. I know everybody grumps when they go through the TSA line, even us guys with pre-check, grump. But, if someone had a bomb in their shoe, you're pretty glad that someone had them take the shoes off and looked. So you're going to start to see IT infrastructure that proactively helps you manage and govern your data. You'll start to see that. You see that today with Palo Alto Networks in the firewall. You see that today with data gravity in the storage array. We call it data-aware storage. You'll see that with your phone systems. You'll see that with your applications. You'll see that across the IT infrastructure. Because basically, it used to be that the only way to lose your data was there was a big gaping hole and the data went away. Now the way you lose your data is something like a crypto locker comes through and it kidnaps it. And so what happens with crypto locker is somebody naively clicks on something. Next thing you know, something's crypting all of your data and you can't access it. And now you're going to go find how to buy a Bitcoin. So you got to pay these guys off in Bitcoin to get your data. So data has actually got a life, and it's got a value, and it's actually can be held for ransom. It can be stolen, it can be duplicated, and it can be lost. So it is not an inanimate object anymore. It's not something that just sits on a disk drive or in the cloud that you don't have to think about because you're not touching it right now. And it's not just lost when it's physically lost. The bigger loss is a virtual loss. So when you think about that in perspective, that's a pretty big nut to crack for an IT person or a governance person. If folks were out at RSA, they would tell you we're on the defensive for data security and data governance. We have to go on the offensive. We have to start putting in place ways to track the information, ways to look at who's reading and writing what. We have to go back and look at how we do a better job of understanding our data. And our IT infrastructure needs to provide those tools. Data Gravity provides them today at the storage array. I encourage you to go ahead and take a look. This isn't a commercial for my company, though. What it really is a wake-up call to say, you could end up in the front pages of your local paper. You could end up with $500,000 to $1 million in fine on your data. You could end up losing your company because you lost your data. So, what do you need to be able to do? From a storage perspective, to me, it is completely unfathomable why the storage array shouldn't tell you what it knows. It has a 360-degree view of your data if you just ask it. It can show you very visually. So when you think about big data, storage is a big data problem. You have a ton of information. You want to ask it questions. You have to reorganize the data so you can ask it intelligent questions. And you don't need to be a data scientist to do that. You want your IT infrastructure to do that for you. You need to be able to discover information. So part of your governance policy should be, how quickly can I find things? I joke, if storage had a theme song, it would be, I still can't find what I'm looking for, right? So basically, you need to be able to find the information, and you need to be able to protect it. And you also need to track activity. So you need to know, are people accessing information that they should be, like an HR report, or are they accessing information they shouldn't be, like the quarterly earnings before they go public, or a special project. So you really do need that traceability. And then it all can be done within the storage array. You also need to be very proactive about what's going on with your data. So for those folks who take away anything from here, it's that data has life, it has value, and it also has risk. So you need to manage all three of those things together, whether your data is sitting in the cloud, whether it's sitting on-prem, whether it's in your iPhone or on your iPad. Your data has life, it has value, and it has risk. And you remember those things, you need to start to manage how you're going to use that data to maximize the upside and protect the downside. Thank you.